James Morrison had always believed in the nobility of his calling. At 34, he carried himself with the disciplined bearing that 12 years of service to the Royal Guard had instilled in him. His uniform was always pressed to perfection, his boots polished to mirror brightness, and his loyalty to the crown was absolute. Or at least, it had been until that November evening when everything changed. Morrison came from a long line of military men. His grandfather had served in World War II, his father had been a career officer in the British Army, and James had naturally followed the family tradition of service. When the opportunity arose to join the elite Royal Guard, he jumped at it without hesitation. The position was more than just a job, it was a sacred trust, a chance to be part of something bigger than himself. The Royal Guard's responsibilities went far beyond the ceremonial duties that the public witnessed during state occasions. Members of the Guard were privy to the inner workings of the royal household, responsible for security during private meetings, and often present during discussions that would never make it to the official record. Morrison had learned early in his career that discretion wasn't just expected, it was mandatory. The unofficial motto among the guards was simple: see everything, hear nothing, remember less. Windsor Castle had been Morrison's primary assignment for the past 5 years. He knew every corridor, every hidden passage, and every room in the ancient fortress. The castle's history stretched back nearly 1,000 years, and its walls held secrets that spanned centuries. Morrison had always found comfort in this continuity, in being part of an institution that had weathered world wars, political upheavals, and social revolutions. Queen Camilla had always been cordial but distant in her interactions with the staff. Unlike some members of the royal family who took time to learn the names of their security detail, she maintained a professional distance that Morrison respected. She was methodical in her daily routines, punctual for appointments, and rarely deviated from her scheduled activities. This predictability made his job easier and allowed him to anticipate security needs well in advance. The first signs that something was different began in early autumn of 2023. Morrison noticed an increase in private meetings that weren't appearing on the official calendar. These sessions typically involved men in expensive suits who arrived in unmarked cars and left without speaking to anyone except Queen Camilla. The meetings always took place in the Queen's private study, a room that was swept for electronic surveillance devices before each session. Morrison's security training had taught him to observe patterns and anomalies. The frequency of these unusual meetings was concerning, but what caught his attention more was the change in Queen Camilla's demeanor following these sessions. She would emerge from the meetings looking tense, often immediately requesting privacy for the remainder of the day. This was unusual for someone who typically maintained strict adherence to her public schedule. The visitors themselves were an interesting group. Morrison began to recognize some of them as repeat attendees. There was a tall, silver-haired man who always carried a leather briefcase and spoke with a slight Swiss accent. Another regular was a woman in her 50s who dressed expensively but conservatively and never stayed for more than an hour. A third frequent visitor was a younger man who looked like he belonged in the financial district rather than a royal residence. Morrison's curiosity might have remained just that, curiosity, if not for an incident in late October. He had been assigned to security for one of these private meetings when a gust of wind from an open window scattered some papers from Queen Camilla's desk. As Morrison moved to help gather the documents, he caught a glimpse of letterheads from several Swiss banks and what appeared to be financial statements with very large numbers. The brief glimpse was enough to raise questions, but Morrison kept them to himself. He had signed confidentiality agreements that made it clear that discussing any aspect of royal business could result not just in termination but in legal action. The royal family's privacy was protected by laws that were rarely tested because most people in Morrison's position understood the consequences of breaking them. However, the incident with the scattered papers planted a seed of unease that continued to grow. Morrison began to pay closer attention to details he had previously overlooked. He noticed that the mysterious meetings often preceded Queen Camilla's travel to specific destinations. There seemed to be a pattern connecting her private appointments with subsequent trips to Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and other locations known for their banking privacy laws. The breakthrough came on November 15, 2023, during what should have been a routine security check. Morrison had been assigned to inspect the lower levels of Windsor Castle as part of regular security protocols. These ancient chambers, some dating back to the original Norman fortifications, were rarely visited except for maintenance purposes. Most of the rooms were used for storage or had been converted into utility spaces that supported the castle's modern operations. Morrison had been through these areas dozens of times before, but, on this particular evening, he noticed something different. A door that was typically locked and unmarked was slightly ajar. Security protocols required him to investigate any anomaly, so he approached carefully, calling out to announce his presence in case maintenance staff were working in the area. The room beyond the door was unlike anything Morrison had seen in the castle before. Instead of the stone walls and ancient architecture that characterized most of the lower level, this space had been completely modernized. The walls were lined with what appeared to be safety deposit boxes, similar to those found in high-end banks. Advanced security systems, including biometric scanners and digital locks, protected individual compartments. In the center of the room stood a large table covered with documents, and Morrison could see computer monitors displaying what looked like financial data. The screens showed account balances, transaction histories, and portfolio summaries that involved sums of money that seemed impossible to comprehend. The numbers weren't in thousands or even millions, they were in the billions. Morrison knew he shouldn't be there, but his sense of duty to the crown compelled him to document what he was seeing. If someone had established an unauthorized operation in the castle, it represented a security breach that needed to be reported. He used his phone to take several photographs, focusing on the documents and computer screens that were clearly visible. As he reviewed the images later, Morrison began to understand that what he had discovered wasn't a security breach by outsiders, it was something far more complex and disturbing. The documents bore Queen Camilla's signature, and the financial accounts were linked to her name through a complex network of trusts and shell companies. The scope of the financial operation was staggering, involving investments in multinational corporations, real estate holdings across multiple countries, and financial instruments that Morrison couldn't even identify. The discovery forced Morrison to confront a fundamental conflict between his duty as a security officer and his loyalty to the institution he had served for over a decade. If what he had found represented legitimate financial activities, then his investigation could be seen as a betrayal of the trust that had been placed in him. But if the activities were improper, then his silence would make him complicit in something that could damage the monarchy far more than any external threat. Morrison spent sleepless nights wrestling with his conscience. He researched the legal and ethical obligations of royal staff members and discovered that the situation was more complex than he had initially understood. The royal family's financial arrangements were governed by a mixture of traditional protocols, parliamentary oversight, and private law that created gray areas where normal rules might not apply. The photographs he had taken showed clear evidence of financial activities that operated outside the usual transparency requirements that governed royal finances. The sovereign grant, which funded the royal family's official duties, was subject to public scrutiny and parliamentary approval. But the accounts Morrison had discovered appeared to operate completely independently of these established systems. Over the following weeks, Morrison continued his regular duties while conducting his own discreet investigation. He began to notice connections between the mysterious meetings, Queen Camilla's travel schedule, and fluctuations in the financial data he had observed. The pattern suggested a level of financial sophistication that went far beyond personal wealth management. The weight of his discovery began to affect Morrison's performance and personal life. His colleagues noticed that he seemed distracted and tense. His commanding officer asked if everything was all right, but Morrison couldn't bring himself to share what he had learned. The isolation of carrying such a significant secret was taking a toll on his mental health and his ability to do his job effectively. Morrison realized that his situation was unsustainable. He couldn't continue to serve effectively while harboring such serious concerns about the activities of the person he was sworn to protect. At the same time, he couldn't ignore what appeared to be a massive financial operation that operated in complete secrecy and seemed to involve resources that far exceeded anything that could be explained by legitimate royal finances. The turning point came when Morrison overheard a conversation between Queen Camilla and one of her regular mysterious visitors. They were discussing the need to accelerate the timeline and move more assets offshore before the audit. The implication that official auditing processes were being circumvented convinced Morrison that what he had discovered represented something more serious than complex but legitimate financial planning. As November drew to a close, Morrison made the most difficult decision of his career. He contacted a trusted friend who worked as a journalist for a respected publication and arranged a meeting. He wasn't ready to go public with his allegations, but he needed advice from someone who understood the legal and ethical implications of what he had discovered. The journalist, Sarah Collins, had covered royal affairs for over 15 years and understood both the sensitivity of Morrison's position and the potential significance of his revelations. She advised him to document everything carefully and to consider contacting appropriate authorities before making any public statements. Collins also warned him about the personal and professional risks he would face if he chose to move forward with his allegations. Morrison's decision to seek outside advice marked the beginning of a chain of events that would ultimately expose one of the most significant financial scandals in modern royal history. His choice to prioritize truth over loyalty would cost him his career and personal security, but it would also reveal a system of financial arrangements that operated in the shadows of one of the world's most scrutinized institutions. The young guard who had once seen his role as protecting the monarchy was about to discover that sometimes protecting an institution means exposing the corruption that threatens to destroy it from within. His journey from loyal servant to whistleblower would challenge everything he believed about duty, loyalty, and the true nature of the institution he had devoted his life to serving. Sarah Collins had built her reputation as a royal correspondent through careful, methodical reporting that respected both the public interest and the legitimate privacy concerns of the royal family. When James Morrison contacted her through secure channels in late November, she knew immediately that whatever he wanted to discuss would be significant. Royal guards didn't break their silence lightly, and the urgency in his encrypted messages suggested something far more serious than typical palace gossip. Their first meeting took place in a small cafe in Kensington, chosen specifically because it was far from the usual haunts of royal watchers and palace staff. Morrison arrived wearing civilian clothes, looking nervous and constantly checking over his shoulder. Collins had seen this behavior before in sources who were about to reveal sensitive information, but Morrison's anxiety seemed deeper than usual. When Morrison showed Collins the photographs he had taken, her initial reaction was skepticism. The images showed financial documents with numbers that seemed too large to be credible, and the sophisticated security setup in the underground vault seemed almost too dramatic to be real. However, Morrison's detailed knowledge of the castle's layout and his ability to answer specific questions about the security systems convinced her that his story deserved serious investigation. Collins spent the following week conducting preliminary research into the financial institutions and shell companies that appeared in Morrison's photographs. What she discovered was a complex network of offshore entities, Swiss bank accounts, and investment vehicles that traced back to Queen Camilla through multiple layers of legal obfuscation. The sophistication of the structure suggested professional financial planning at the highest level. The journalist's investigation revealed that several of the mysterious visitors Morrison had observed were well-known figures in international finance. The silver-haired man with the Swiss accent was Marcus Zimmermann, a private banker who specialized in wealth management for ultra-high-net-worth individuals. The conservatively dressed woman was Dr. Elena Vasquez, a lawyer who had built her practice around offshore financial structures for European nobility. The younger man was Timothy Richardson, a specialist in alternative investments who had previously worked for several major investment banks. Collins realized that she was looking at evidence of a financial operation that operated at a level of sophistication typically reserved for multinational corporations or sovereign wealth funds. The amounts involved, if Morrison's photographs were accurate, represented resources that could influence global markets and political decisions. This wasn't simply about personal wealth, it was about the concentration of financial power in the hands of someone who was supposed to represent institutional stability and constitutional monarchy. The breakthrough in Collins' investigation came when she managed to trace some of the shell companies back to specific transactions. Public records showed that several of the entities connected to Queen Camilla's network had made significant investments in defense contractors, energy companies, and pharmaceutical corporations. The timing of these investments coincided with government policy decisions that benefited these same industries. Collins understood that she was potentially looking at a story that could fundamentally change public perception of the royal family's role in British society. The traditional understanding of constitutional monarchy assumed that the royal family remained above political and commercial influence. If Queen Camilla was using her position to generate private wealth through informed investment decisions, it raised serious questions about conflicts of interest and the proper role of the monarchy in a democratic society. However, Collins also recognized the enormous legal and ethical challenges involved in pursuing such a story. The royal family enjoyed protections under British law that made investigative reporting extremely difficult. Even publishing factual information about royal finances could result in legal action that could destroy both her career and her publication. She needed more than Morrison's photographs, she needed independent verification and additional sources. Collins decided to approach the story methodically, beginning with the financial institutions that appeared in Morrison's evidence. She reached out to contacts in the Swiss banking industry, using established relationships with sources who had helped her with previous investigations into international money flows. The responses she received were carefully worded but revealing. One source, a former executive at a major Swiss bank, confirmed that Queen Camilla's financial arrangements were well known within certain circles of private banking. He described a system where royal family members could access specialized financial services that weren't available to ordinary wealthy individuals. These services included accelerated transaction processing, enhanced privacy protections, and investment opportunities that required both significant capital and political connections. Another source, a lawyer who specialized in international tax law, explained how the complex structure of trusts and offshore companies could be used to minimize tax obligations while maximizing investment returns. She pointed out that while such arrangements weren't necessarily illegal, they operated in a gray area where traditional rules about financial transparency and public accountability might not apply. Collins began to understand that what Morrison had discovered wasn't necessarily criminal activity in the traditional sense. Instead, it appeared to be a sophisticated system for converting political access and insider knowledge into personal financial gain. The distinction was important from a legal perspective, but it raised equally serious questions about the ethical responsibilities of public figures. The journalist's investigation expanded to include examination of government policy decisions that had benefited companies in Queen Camilla's investment portfolio. She discovered a pattern of regulatory changes, tax policies, and government contracts that consistently favored industries where the royal family had financial interests. The correlation was subtle but persistent across multiple sectors and time periods. Collins realized that she needed additional sources to corroborate Morrison's allegations and provide context for the financial activities she was documenting. She began reaching out to current and former palace staff members, using techniques she had developed over years of royal reporting to identify individuals who might be willing to share information. The response was mixed but ultimately productive. Several former employees confirmed that they had observed unusual financial activities during their time at various royal residences. While none had access to the specific information Morrison had provided, their accounts supported his description of secretive meetings and irregular financial arrangements. One particularly valuable source was Margaret Thompson, a former palace accountant who had left royal service 5 years earlier. Thompson revealed that she had raised concerns about certain financial irregularities during her tenure but had been told that such matters were outside her area of responsibility. She had been reassigned to different duties after asking too many questions about accounts that didn't appear in official royal financial reports. Thompson's account provided crucial context for understanding how the financial operation Morrison had discovered could function within the palace structure. She explained that the royal household's accounting systems were deliberately complex, with multiple layers of oversight that created opportunities for certain activities to escape routine scrutiny. Collins' investigation also revealed the international scope of Queen Camilla's financial network. Bank records and corporate filings showed connections to tax havens in the Caribbean, investment vehicles in Luxembourg, and real estate holdings in jurisdictions known for their financial privacy laws. The global reach of the operation suggested a level of sophistication that required professional management and significant resources to maintain. The journalist began to piece together a timeline that connected specific royal activities with financial transactions. She discovered that Queen Camilla's official travels often coincided with meetings at financial institutions in the countries she visited. State visits and diplomatic trips appeared to provide cover for business activities that generated substantial returns for her private investment portfolio. One particularly striking example involved a state visit to the Middle East that had been presented as a cultural and diplomatic mission. Collins' investigation revealed that during the same trip, Queen Camilla had met with sovereign wealth fund managers and signed agreements that resulted in significant investments in her offshore companies. The mixing of official royal duties with private financial business raised serious questions about the proper use of state resources and diplomatic access. Collins also discovered that the financial network extended beyond Queen Camilla herself. Family members and close associates appeared to benefit from investment opportunities and financial arrangements that were made possible by their connections to the royal family. The system seemed designed to generate wealth for an entire network of individuals while maintaining plausible deniability about the source of their financial success. As Collins' investigation progressed, she began to receive indirect pressure to abandon the story. Legal letters arrived at her newspaper questioning her right to investigate royal financial matters. Sources who had initially been cooperative became reluctant to continue their cooperation. Collins recognized these tactics as typical responses to investigations that threatened powerful interests. The pressure only reinforced Collins' determination to pursue the story responsibly but thoroughly. She understood that the public had a right to know about financial arrangements that might compromise the constitutional role of the monarchy. At the same time, she recognized her obligation to verify every allegation and provide opportunity for response before publication. Collins arranged a second meeting with Morrison to discuss the additional evidence she had gathered and to prepare him for the scrutiny that would inevitably follow if they decided to publish the story. Morrison had been following news reports about royal activities with new awareness of their potential financial implications, and he had documented additional suspicious patterns in Queen Camilla's schedule and visitor logs. The second meeting revealed that Morrison's position within the royal guard was becoming increasingly difficult. His colleagues had noticed his distraction and nervousness, and his commanding officers were asking questions about his recent performance. Morrison realized that his investigation activities were becoming visible to others within the security apparatus, and he worried about the consequences of being discovered before the story could be published. Collins advised Morrison to be extremely careful about his activities while she completed her verification process. She was close to having enough independent confirmation to publish the story, but she needed a few more weeks to ensure that every allegation could be supported by credible evidence. The stakes were too high for any mistakes or unsubstantiated claims. The final phase of Collins' investigation involved consulting with legal experts and financial analysts to ensure that she understood the full implications of what she was reporting. The story wasn't just about Queen Camilla's personal finances. It was about a system that could fundamentally alter the balance of power between the monarchy and democratic institutions. As December 2023 approached, Collins faced the decision of whether to move forward with publication. She had accumulated substantial evidence supporting Morrison's initial allegations, but she also understood that publishing the story would trigger consequences that would extend far beyond her own career. The decision would affect Morrison's life, the royal family's reputation, and potentially the future of constitutional monarchy in Britain. Collins spent sleepless nights reviewing her evidence and considering her responsibilities as a journalist. She had built her career on careful, accurate reporting that served the public interest while respecting legitimate privacy concerns. This story would test every principle she had developed about responsible journalism and the proper relationship between the press and powerful institutions. The weight of the decision was enormous, but Collins ultimately concluded that the evidence she had gathered represented information that the public needed to know. The financial arrangements she had documented raised fundamental questions about accountability, transparency, and the proper role of the monarchy in a democratic society. Her obligation to inform the public outweighed the personal and professional risks involved in publication. The publication of Sarah Collins' investigation on December 18, 2023, sent shockwaves through British society and reverberated across the international community. The headline, "Royal Guard Reveals Alleged Billion-Dollar Secret Vault Linked to Queen Camilla," dominated news cycles for days, triggering immediate responses from Buckingham Palace, government officials, and financial regulators around the world. The story's impact was immediate and devastating. Within hours of publication, the pound sterling experienced significant volatility as currency traders struggled to assess the implications of the allegations for British political stability. International media outlets picked up the story, with major newspapers in the United States, Europe, and Asia running detailed analyses of what the revelations might mean for the future of the British monarchy. Buckingham Palace's initial response was swift and categorically denied all allegations. A statement released through official channels described the story as completely fabricated and based on falsified documents and unreliable sources. The palace announced that it was considering legal action against the publication and promised a full investigation into how such malicious falsehoods had been created and disseminated. However, the palace's denial was undermined by the detailed nature of Collins' reporting and the compelling evidence she presented. The photographs Morrison had provided were subjected to immediate forensic analysis by independent experts, who confirmed that they showed genuine documents and had not been digitally manipulated. The financial records referenced in the story were verified through cross-referencing with publicly available corporate filings and banking records. James Morrison found himself at the center of an international media storm that he was completely unprepared to handle. His identity as the source of the allegations was revealed within days of publication, despite Collins' efforts to protect his anonymity. Morrison was immediately suspended from his position with the Royal Guard pending a formal investigation, and he began receiving legal threats from lawyers representing various parties mentioned in the story. The personal cost to Morrison was immediate and severe. He was forced to leave his home due to security concerns and constant media attention. Former colleagues refused to speak with him, viewing his revelations as a betrayal of their shared oath of loyalty. His family received threatening phone calls from unknown individuals, and his children were harassed at school by reporters seeking additional information. Despite the personal costs, Morrison remained committed to his decision to speak out. In a carefully managed interview with Collins' publication, he explained his motivations and provided additional details about his discoveries. Morrison emphasized that his decision was driven by loyalty to the institution of the monarchy rather than any personal animosity toward Queen Camilla or other royal family members. Morrison's interview revealed additional details about the scope of the financial operation he had discovered. He described observing regular courier deliveries to the secret vault space, transfers of what appeared to be gold bars and precious stones, and the presence of electronic trading equipment that suggested real-time financial market activity. These details painted a picture of an operation that went far beyond simple wealth management. The investigation triggered by Collins' reporting expanded rapidly as financial regulators and law enforcement agencies began their own inquiries. The Financial Conduct Authority announced a formal investigation into potential violations of British financial regulations, while international agencies began examining cross-border transactions that appeared in the leaked documents. Swiss banking authorities found themselves under particular scrutiny as the investigation revealed the central role of Swiss financial institutions in facilitating Queen Camilla's alleged financial activities. The Swiss Federal Financial Market Supervisory Authority initiated its own inquiry and began cooperating with British investigators to trace funds that had moved through Swiss accounts. The political implications of the scandal became apparent as members of parliament began calling for formal hearings and increased oversight of royal finances. Opposition parties demanded that the government explain how such extensive financial activities could have occurred without regulatory oversight or parliamentary knowledge. The scandal threatened to become a constitutional crisis if it was determined that royal family members had used their positions for private financial gain. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak found himself in an extremely difficult position, forced to balance constitutional traditions that protected royal privacy with mounting public demands for accountability and transparency. His initial statements attempted to separate the allegations from broader questions about the monarchy's role, but the scope of the alleged financial activities made such separation increasingly difficult. International allies and trading partners began expressing concerns about the stability of British institutions and the potential impact of the scandal on ongoing diplomatic and economic relationships. The allegations raised questions about whether royal family members had access to confidential government information that could be used for financial advantage, potentially compromising Britain's relationships with other nations. Financial markets continued to react negatively to the ongoing uncertainty surrounding the allegations. The FTSE 100 experienced significant volatility as investors struggled to assess the potential long-term implications for British political and economic stability. Currency markets showed particular sensitivity to developments in the story, with the pound weakening against major currencies as each new revelation emerged. The investigation revealed the international scope of the alleged financial network through examination of corporate records and banking transactions. Investigators discovered connections to investment vehicles in multiple tax havens, real estate holdings in major international cities, and business relationships with multinational corporations that had significant contracts with the British government. One particularly concerning discovery was evidence of coordination between Queen Camilla's investment activities and insider information about government policy decisions. Investigators found that several major investment positions had been established shortly before announcement of policy changes that significantly benefited the companies involved. While such timing could have been coincidental, the pattern was sufficiently consistent to raise serious questions about information access and usage. The scandal also exposed weaknesses in the regulatory framework governing royal finances. Investigators discovered that the traditional systems for monitoring royal family financial activities had significant gaps that could allow substantial private wealth accumulation without proper oversight. The combination of constitutional protections and practical challenges in monitoring offshore financial activities had created opportunities for the kind of complex financial arrangements Morrison had discovered. International cooperation became essential as the investigation revealed the global nature of the alleged financial network. British investigators worked with counterparts in Switzerland, Luxembourg, the Cayman Islands, and other jurisdictions to trace financial flows and identify the full scope of the activities under investigation. The complexity of the international financial arrangements required expertise from multiple regulatory agencies and law enforcement organizations. The media attention surrounding the scandal intensified as additional sources came forward with information that supported and expanded upon Morrison's initial allegations. Former palace staff members, financial industry professionals, and government officials began providing information that painted a picture of systematic financial activities that had operated for years without proper scrutiny or oversight. Margaret Thompson, the former palace accountant who had previously spoken with Collins, agreed to testify publicly about the financial irregularities she had observed during her tenure. Her testimony provided crucial insider perspective on how the royal household's accounting systems could have been used to facilitate the activities Morrison had discovered. The scandal's impact on Queen Camilla personally was severe and immediate. Public opinion polls showed a dramatic decline in her approval ratings, with many Britons expressing anger and disappointment about the allegations. She was forced to cancel several planned public appearances due to security concerns and negative public reaction. The broader royal family also experienced significant damage to their public standing as a result of the scandal. Even though the allegations focused specifically on Queen Camilla, the revelations raised broader questions about royal family financial practices and accountability. Public support for the monarchy as an institution began to decline as citizens questioned whether constitutional protections were being abused for private financial gain. Legal experts began analyzing the potential criminal implications of the alleged activities. While the complex nature of international financial law made definitive assessments difficult, several aspects of the reported arrangements appeared to potentially violate laws regarding tax evasion, money laundering, and conflicts of interest. The possibility of criminal charges added another layer of seriousness to the ongoing investigation. The investigation also revealed the sophisticated nature of the financial advice and management services that had facilitated the alleged activities. The involvement of highly respected international financial institutions and legal professionals suggested that the arrangements had been carefully structured to operate within legal gray areas while maximizing financial benefits and minimizing regulatory exposure. Parliamentary pressure for a formal investigation increased as more details emerged about the scope and sophistication of the alleged financial activities. Members of Parliament from both major parties called for hearings that would examine not only the specific allegations but also the broader system of royal financial oversight and accountability. The constitutional implications of the scandal became increasingly apparent as legal experts analyzed the relationship between the monarchy's traditional privileges and modern expectations of transparency and accountability. The allegations raised fundamental questions about whether the constitutional protections enjoyed by the royal family were compatible with the financial arrangements Morrison had discovered. International media coverage expanded the global impact of the scandal as news organizations around the world examined the implications for other constitutional monarchies and democratic institutions. The story became a case study in how traditional institutions might struggle to adapt to modern expectations of transparency and accountability in an interconnected global financial system. As December 2023 drew to a close, it became clear that Morrison's decision to speak out had triggered a chain of events that would fundamentally reshape public understanding of the modern British monarchy. The investigation was entering a new phase that would determine whether the allegations could be proven in court and what consequences might follow for the individuals and institutions involved. The new year brought intensified scrutiny as multiple investigations converged on the allegations James Morrison had brought to light. January 2024 marked a turning point when the Financial Conduct Authority announced that their preliminary investigation had uncovered evidence supporting many of Morrison's claims. The formal acknowledgement by British regulatory authorities that the allegations deserved serious investigation fundamentally changed the nature of the scandal. The FCA's announcement triggered a comprehensive forensic audit of financial records spanning nearly a decade. International cooperation agreements allowed investigators to access banking records from Switzerland, Luxembourg, and the Cayman Islands that had previously been protected by banking secrecy laws. The scope of the investigation expanded to include dozens of financial institutions and hundreds of individual transactions. Queen Camilla's legal team, led by some of Britain's most prominent barristers, mounted an aggressive defense strategy that challenged both the legitimacy of the investigation and the interpretation of the financial evidence. They argued that the complex financial arrangements were entirely legal and represented sophisticated but appropriate wealth management strategies available to high-net-worth individuals. However, the defense strategy faced significant challenges as investigators uncovered evidence of coordination between financial activities and privileged information. Bank records showed that major investment positions had been established with timing that suggested advanced knowledge of government policy decisions, regulatory changes, and international agreements that weren't publicly announced until weeks or months later. One particularly damaging discovery involved investments in defense contractors made shortly before announcement of major military procurement decisions. Financial records showed that Queen Camilla's investment portfolio had accumulated significant positions in 3 companies that subsequently won contracts worth billions of pounds. The timing was so precise that investigators concluded it could not have been coincidental. The investigation also revealed the sophisticated methods used to obscure the true ownership and control of financial assets. Investigators discovered multiple layers of shell companies, nominee directors, and complex trust structures that made it extremely difficult to trace the ultimate beneficial ownership of investments and accounts. The legal architecture was so complex that it required forensic accountants with specialized international experience to unravel. Morrison continued to cooperate with investigators despite mounting legal and personal pressure. His detailed knowledge of palace operations and security protocols proved invaluable in helping investigators understand how the financial operation had functioned within the royal household. Morrison provided extensive testimony about the logistics of the secret meetings, the security arrangements for the underground vault, and the patterns of activity he had observed. The investigation expanded to examine the roles of the financial professionals who had facilitated the alleged activities. Marcus Zimmermann, the Swiss banker, was questioned by authorities in Switzerland and Britain about his dealings with Queen Camilla. Dr. Elena Vasquez faced scrutiny about her role in creating the offshore corporate structures, while Timothy Richardson was investigated for his management of alternative investment portfolios. These financial professionals presented their own defense strategies, arguing that they had simply provided standard wealth management services to a legitimate client. They maintained that they had no knowledge of any improper use of privileged information and had followed all applicable laws and professional standards in their dealings with Queen Camilla. However, investigators discovered communications between these professionals and Queen Camilla that suggested a higher level of coordination than simple client service. Email records and encrypted messaging showed discussions about timing investments to coincide with policy announcements and structuring transactions to minimize regulatory visibility. The communications painted a picture of active collaboration in activities that went beyond traditional wealth management. The parliamentary investigation, led by the Treasury Select Committee, began holding public hearings in February 2024. The hearings provided a forum for public examination of the evidence and testimony from key witnesses, including Morrison, financial experts, and former palace staff members. The televised hearings captured public attention and became a focal point for national debate about royal accountability. Morrison's parliamentary testimony was particularly compelling as he provided detailed first-hand accounts of his discoveries and the decision-making process that led him to speak publicly. Under questioning from committee members, Morrison maintained that his actions were motivated by duty to the Crown and concern that institutional integrity was being compromised by the activities he had witnessed. The parliamentary hearings also featured testimony from financial experts who explained the mechanics of the complex arrangements Morrison had discovered. These experts helped committee members and the public understand how sophisticated financial engineering could be used to convert privileged access into private wealth while maintaining plausible legal defensibility. International cooperation in the investigation revealed the global reach of the alleged financial network. Swiss authorities provided evidence of accounts containing hundreds of millions of pounds, while investigations in the Cayman Islands uncovered additional offshore structures that appeared to be connected to the main operation. The international scope of the arrangement suggested a level of planning and sophistication that indicated professional management over many years. The investigation also examined the role of technology in facilitating the alleged activities. Forensic analysis of the computer systems Morrison had observed in the underground vault revealed sophisticated trading platforms and communication systems that allowed real-time coordination with financial markets around the world. The technology infrastructure suggested an operation that was actively managed rather than simply a passive wealth storage facility. Public opinion continued to shift against Queen Camilla as more evidence emerged through the various investigations. Polling data showed that a majority of Britons believed the allegations were credible and that Queen Camilla should face consequences if wrongdoing was proven. The scandal had fundamentally altered public perception of the royal family and raised broader questions about the future of the monarchy. The constitutional implications of the scandal deepened as legal scholars examined the relationship between the evidence and fundamental principles of constitutional monarchy. The allegations suggested that royal privileges and access had been systematized for private financial benefit in ways that were incompatible with the constitutional role of the monarchy as politically neutral arbiter. International diplomatic consequences began to emerge as other governments examined their relationships with Britain in light of the scandal. Several international agreements and partnerships faced scrutiny as foreign governments questioned whether privileged information shared with Britain had been used for private financial gain rather than legitimate state purposes. The economic impact of the scandal continued to affect British financial markets and the value of the pound sterling. While markets had stabilized somewhat after the initial shock, ongoing uncertainty about the investigation's outcome and potential constitutional changes continued to create volatility and investor concern about political stability. Legal proceedings began to intensify as prosecutors examined whether the evidence supported criminal charges. The complexity of international financial law made such determinations difficult, but prosecutors appeared to be building cases around potential charges of tax evasion, money laundering, and violations of laws governing conflicts of interest in public positions. The investigation revealed additional evidence of potential coordination between Queen Camilla's financial activities and those of other royal family members. Bank records and corporate filings suggested that the sophisticated financial arrangements weren't limited to Queen Camilla but involved other senior royals in what appeared to be a coordinated wealth accumulation strategy. Morrison's position became increasingly precarious as the investigation progressed. While he had been granted certain legal protections as a whistleblower, he continued to face significant personal and financial pressure. His legal expenses were mounting, and his future employment prospects remained uncertain as he had been effectively blacklisted from security-related positions. The scandal's impact on the broader royal institution became increasingly apparent as constitutional experts began discussing potential reforms to royal financial oversight and accountability. Proposals ranged from increased parliamentary supervision of royal finances to more fundamental changes in the relationship between the monarchy and democratic institutions. International media coverage expanded to examine similar arrangements in other constitutional monarchies, raising questions about whether the British scandal reflected broader patterns of royal financial practice or represented an isolated case of alleged abuse of constitutional privileges. By the spring of 2024, it was clear that Morrison's revelations had triggered a constitutional crisis that would require fundamental examination of the monarchy's role in modern democratic society. The investigation had moved beyond questions of individual wrongdoing to broader issues of institutional accountability and the compatibility of traditional royal privileges with contemporary expectations of transparency. The various investigations were building toward potentially explosive conclusions that could reshape the British constitutional system. Evidence was mounting that the allegations Morrison had made were not only credible but represented systematic activities that had operated for years with sophisticated planning and international coordination. As investigators prepared their preliminary findings for public release, it became apparent that the scandal would likely result in consequences that extended far beyond Queen Camilla's personal reputation. The evidence suggested institutional failures and systematic abuse of constitutional privileges that could fundamentally alter public understanding of the monarchy's proper role in British society. The stage was set for revelations that would test the resilience of British democratic institutions and the monarchy's ability to maintain public legitimacy in the face of evidence that traditional privileges had been systematically exploited for private financial gain. Morrison's decision to speak out had unleashed forces that would ultimately determine whether the British constitutional system could adapt to address the fundamental conflicts his revelations had exposed. The culmination of the investigation came in June 2024 when multiple regulatory agencies simultaneously released their findings, creating a perfect storm of revelations that would forever change the British monarchy. The Financial Conduct Authority, the National Crime Agency, and international partners in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands released coordinated reports that confirmed the most serious allegations James Morrison had made and revealed additional activities that even Morrison hadn't discovered. The FCA's comprehensive report documented a financial network that had generated over £2 billion in returns through systematic exploitation of privileged information and constitutional protections. The investigation had traced transactions spanning 12 years, revealing a pattern of investment activities that consistently preceded favorable government decisions by mere days or weeks. The precision of the timing made coincidence statistically impossible. The most damaging revelation was the discovery of encrypted communications between Queen Camilla and senior government officials that showed direct requests for advance information about policy decisions, regulatory changes, and international agreements. The communications revealed a systematic process for monetizing insider information that operated at the highest levels of government and involved coordination with multiple departments and agencies. Swiss banking authorities released parallel findings that documented the mechanics of the financial arrangements in unprecedented detail. Their report revealed that Queen Camilla's accounts had received special treatment that wasn't available to other clients, including accelerated transaction processing during sensitive time periods and enhanced privacy protections that exceeded normal banking standards. The National Crime Agency's report focused on potential criminal violations and recommended prosecution on multiple charges including tax evasion, money laundering, and corruption in public office. The agency had built what prosecutors described as an overwhelming case based on financial records, communications evidence, and testimony from dozens of witnesses including Morrison and other palace staff members. Morrison's role as the catalyst for these revelations was formally acknowledged in the official reports, which credited his courage and attention to detail with exposing what investigators described as one of the most sophisticated financial fraud schemes in British history. However, the recognition came at enormous personal cost as Morrison continued to face legal harassment and death threats from unknown individuals. The parliamentary investigation culminated in a scathing report that concluded Queen Camilla had systematically abused constitutional privileges for private financial gain and recommended fundamental reforms to royal oversight and accountability. The committee's report called for immediate suspension of Queen Camilla's official duties and consideration of criminal prosecution to the full extent of the law. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak faced the most serious constitutional crisis of his tenure as the evidence made continued support for Queen Camilla politically impossible. In an emergency session of Parliament, Sunak announced that the government would support whatever legal proceedings were deemed appropriate and committed to comprehensive reforms of royal financial oversight. The constitutional implications reached their climax when King Charles III was forced to address the nation about the allegations against his wife. In an unprecedented televised statement, the king announced that Queen Camilla would immediately suspend all official duties pending resolution of the investigations and legal proceedings. The statement marked the first time in modern history that a senior royal had been forced to step back due to criminal allegations. Queen Camilla's legal team made a final attempt to challenge the evidence through emergency court proceedings, arguing that the investigation had violated constitutional protections and that the evidence had been improperly obtained. However, British courts ruled that the seriousness of the allegations and the strength of the evidence justified the extraordinary measures that had been taken. International reaction was swift and profound. The European Union announced that it would review all agreements with Britain to ensure that privileged information hadn't been compromised. The United States Congress called for hearings about intelligence sharing arrangements, while major trading partners expressed concern about the integrity of future negotiations with British officials. The scandal triggered broader examination of royal finances across Europe as other constitutional monarchies faced questions about their own oversight mechanisms. Norway, Sweden, and the Netherlands announced reviews of their royal financial arrangements to ensure similar abuses couldn't occur in their systems. Financial markets initially reacted negatively to the uncertainty created by the constitutional crisis, but gradually stabilized as investors recognized that British democratic institutions were functioning properly in response to the scandal. The pound recovered much of its losses as international confidence in British rule of law was reinforced by the thoroughness and transparency of the investigations. Morrison's vindication came with the publication of the official reports, but the personal costs of his decision to speak out remained significant. He had lost his career, faced enormous legal expenses, and continued to receive threats from individuals who viewed his actions as treasonous. However, Morrison expressed no regret about his decision, stating that protecting institutional integrity was worth any personal sacrifice. Legal proceedings against Queen Camilla began in earnest during the summer of 2024 as prosecutors filed formal charges of tax evasion, money laundering, and corruption in public office. The charges carried potential sentences of up to 20 years in prison and represented the most serious criminal allegations ever filed against a senior member of the British royal family. The trial preparation revealed additional evidence that expanded the scope of the alleged activities beyond what had been documented in the initial investigations. Prosecutors discovered evidence suggesting that the financial arrangements had influenced British policy decisions in ways that benefited Queen Camilla's investment portfolio while potentially compromising national interests. International cooperation in building the criminal case set new precedents for cross-border prosecution of financial crimes involving public officials. The coordination between British, Swiss, and Caribbean authorities demonstrated that traditional banking secrecy laws couldn't protect individuals who systematically abused public positions for private gain. The scandal's impact on the monarchy as an institution became apparent as public support for the royal family reached historic lows. Polling data showed that a majority of Britons favored significant constitutional reforms that would increase royal accountability and transparency. Some polls even showed growing support for republicanism as citizens questioned whether the monarchy was compatible with modern democratic values. Morrison received formal recognition for his whistleblowing activities when Parliament passed a resolution thanking him for his service to constitutional democracy and the rule of law. However, this recognition did little to alleviate the ongoing personal and financial challenges he faced as a result of his decision to speak out. The financial professionals who had facilitated Queen Camilla's activities faced their own legal consequences as regulators in multiple jurisdictions filed charges and imposed sanctions. Marcus Zimmermann lost his banking license in Switzerland, Dr. Elena Vasquez faced disbarment proceedings, and Timothy Richardson was banned from working in financial services. Constitutional reforms proposed in response to the scandal included creation of an independent oversight body for royal finances, mandatory public disclosure of royal investment activities, and elimination of traditional immunities that had allowed such abuses to occur. These reforms represented the most significant changes to the monarchy's legal status since the English Civil War. The international financial system also began implementing changes designed to prevent similar abuses in the future. Banking regulators worldwide announced enhanced due diligence requirements for politically exposed persons, while tax authorities increased cooperation to prevent offshore structures from being used to hide financial crimes. As 2024 progressed toward Queen Camilla's trial, it became clear that Morrison's decision to break his oath of silence had triggered transformative changes that extended far beyond the specific allegations he had made. His revelations had exposed fundamental weaknesses in the systems designed to ensure accountability among those who hold positions of public trust. The trial itself promised to be one of the most significant legal proceedings in British history, with implications that extended beyond Queen Camilla's personal fate to the future of constitutional monarchy as a political system. The evidence Morrison had provided would be central to the prosecution's case, ensuring that his role in exposing the scandal would be remembered as a defining moment in British constitutional history. Morrison's legacy was already secure as the man whose conscience and courage had prevented the continued abuse of constitutional privileges and ensured that no individual, regardless of their position or status, remained above the law. His decision to prioritize institutional integrity over personal loyalty had vindicated the principle that true service to the crown required protecting the monarchy from those who would exploit it for private gain. The final chapter of Morrison's story remained to be written as Queen Camilla's trial approached and British society continued to grapple with the constitutional and political implications of the revelations he had made possible. However, his transformation from loyal guard to principled whistleblower had already earned him a permanent place in the history of British democracy and the ongoing struggle to ensure accountability among those who wield power in the public's name. The investigation that began with Morrison's discovery in an underground vault at Windsor Castle had ultimately revealed truths about power, privilege, and accountability that would reshape British constitutional law for generations to come. His courage in speaking truth to power had proven that even the most protected and powerful individuals must ultimately answer to the people they claim to serve. In the shadowy corridors of power where secrets are currency and silence is golden, one man's conscience became louder than his oath of loyalty. For 12 years, James Morrison had stood guard over the most protected secrets of the British royal family. He had witnessed conversations that could topple governments, seen documents that could rewrite history, and kept silent about discoveries that could shake the very foundation of the monarchy. But, on a cold November evening in 2023, as he walked through the ancient stone passages beneath Windsor Castle, Morrison stumbled upon something that would haunt him for months and, ultimately force him to break his sacred vow of silence. What he discovered wasn't just another royal secret, it was evidence of a financial empire so vast and controversial that it could change how the world views the modern monarchy forever. The discovery involved Queen Camilla, vault systems that officially don't exist, and money trails that lead to some of the most powerful financial institutions in the world. Morrison's revelation wasn't just about hidden wealth, it was about a network of financial arrangements that had been operating in plain sight, protected by centuries of tradition and the unquestionable authority of the crown. As Morrison later told investigators, "I joined the royal guard to protect the monarchy, not to become complicit in something that could destroy the very institution I swore to defend." His decision to speak out would trigger an investigation that reaches into the highest levels of British society, involving Swiss bank accounts, offshore companies, and financial arrangements that blur the line between personal wealth and state resources. This is the story of how one man's dedication to truth became more important than his loyalty to the crown, and how his revelations opened a window into a world that the public was never meant to see.